The story opens at the towering iron gates of Spencer International, a place where Kerry Spencer's word was once law. The air is thick with tension as Kerry, dressed in a flawless blue suit, stares in disbelief at a sign that reads banned. The very people he mentored now stand inside the gate, pointing fingers and laughing at his sudden fall from grace. As news cameras begin to flash, capturing the billionaire's ultimate shame, a small figure in a purple dress steps forward. Little Deanna Ahart doesn't see a corporate failure or a disgraced mogul. She sees a man whose heart is breaking, and she is about to do something that no boardroom expert could ever predict. Before we continue, this is Brittany's Stories, a home of powerful, emotional, and unforgettable stories, filled with drama, secrets, unexpected twists, and life-changing moments. Each story is crafted to entertain, inspire, and keep you thinking long after the video ends. If you love shocking reveals, hidden identities, billionaire secrets, and stories that touch the heart, you're in the right place. Backhand index pointing right like our videos. If they move you backhand index pointing right, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Kerry Spencer hadn't always been the man standing humiliated at his own gates. 20 years earlier, he had been hungry, brilliant, and absolutely certain that compassion was a luxury successful people couldn't afford. He'd grown up in a modest neighborhood where his father repaired cars and his mother cleaned houses, and he'd sworn that his children, if he ever had them, would never know what it felt like to count pennies at a grocery store. The day he closed his first major deal, acquiring a failing construction firm for a fraction of its worth, he stood in the empty office and felt something close to religious conviction. The previous owner, an older man named Thomas Brennan, had pleaded for a chance to keep a small stake in the company, something to retire on after 40 years of building it from nothing. Kerry had looked him in the eye and said no. Business was business. Sentiment was weakness. 6 months later, he'd heard that Brennan had taken a job as a security guard to make ends meet. Kerry never looked back. Every skyscraper that rose under the Spencer International name became a monument to his philosophy. Only permanence mattered. Only concrete and steel could be trusted. Only what could be measured in quarterly reports had value. He walked past the construction workers who built his towers without learning their names. He approved budgets that squeezed contractors until they could barely afford to pay their crews. When his assistant mentioned that the janitorial staff was requesting better health coverage, he'd cut the contract entirely and hired a cheaper service. His ex-wife had left him, taking their young daughter with her, saying she couldn't recognize the man he'd become. He'd responded by burying himself deeper in work, telling himself that providing for them financially was the only kind of love that mattered. The divorce settlement was generous. He made sure of that. But when his daughter graduated high school, he sent a check instead of attending the ceremony. There was a critical zoning meeting that day. Priorities. The protege who now stood mocking him from behind the gates had once been different. Her name was Victoria Chun, and she'd started as an intern with bright eyes and innovative ideas about sustainable building practices that balance profit with community impact. Kerry had mentored her personally, but only after reshaping her vision into something harder, colder, more efficient. He'd taught her that the only people who mattered were shareholders. He'd shown her how to eliminate the soft expenses that didn't contribute to the bottom line. He'd created her in his own image. And now that image stared back at him from the other side of the iron gates, perfected beyond even his own ruthlessness. Victoria had learned his lessons too well. She'd understood that if only power mattered, then taking his power was simply good business. She'd orchestrated the board coup with the same cold precision he'd once admired, the same dismissal of loyalty he'd taught her was. Kerry had built an empire, but empires, he was learning, were only as loyal as the fear that sustained them. Victoria Chin stood behind the gates with the posture of someone who had finally claimed what she believed was rightfully hers. The dark suit she wore was identical to the ones Kerry had always favored. Sharp lines, no softness, designed to communicate power before a single word was spoken. She'd learned from the best, after all, and now she was demonstrating just how thoroughly she'd absorbed those lessons. "Remove this stranger from the premises," she said, her voice carrying across the driveway with perfect clarity. She wanted everyone to hear, wanted the cameras to capture it, wanted Kerry to understand that the humiliation was intentional, carefully orchestrated, just as he'd once taught her to orchestrate every move in business. Kerry's hands curled into fists at his sides. "Victoria, this is insane. You can't just—" "Can I?" She tilted her head, and for a moment, Kerry saw a flash of something in her eyes. Not quite satisfaction. Something deeper. Something that looked almost like vindication. "You taught me that ownership is everything, Kerry. And as of this morning, the board voted unanimously to transfer your shares. Turns out, when you spend decades making people afraid instead of loyal, they're quite eager to side with whoever offers them an alternative." The security guards shifted uncomfortably. Kerry recognized them, had seen them every morning for years, but their eyes slid away from his now. They had families to feed, mortgages to pay. They would follow whoever signed their paychecks, just as Kerry had always insisted they should. "I built this company," Kerry said, hating the desperate edge that crept into his voice. "I spent 20 years building an empire on the backs of people you never bothered to see as human," Victoria interrupted. Her finger remained extended, pointed at him like an accusation made flesh. "You know how many contractors went bankrupt because you squeezed their margins until they couldn't survive? How many employees worked themselves sick because you eliminated health benefits to boost quarterly earnings? I used to think you were brilliant. Now I realize you were just cruel." The crowd had grown larger. Smartphones captured every moment, broadcasting Kerry's downfall in real time. Someone in the back laughed again, emboldened by Victoria's performance. "You taught me that there's no room for weakness in business," Victoria continued, and now her voice carried something that sounded almost like grief. "That compassion was liability, that the only thing that mattered was winning. So I won, Kerry. I used every tactic you taught me. I leveraged every relationship you showed me how to exploit. I turned the board against you the same way you turned them against Thomas Brennan 2 decades ago." Kerry felt the ground shift beneath him. Thomas Brennan. He hadn't thought about that name in years. "The difference is," Victoria said softly, "I'm going to do something you never did. I'm going to build something better. Something that doesn't require crushing people to succeed. Consider this your lesson in what happens when you create a world where loyalty means nothing and power means everything." She turned away, dismissing him with the same casual indifference he'd shown to countless others. The gates remained locked. The sign remained in place. And Kerry Spencer remained outside, watching his empire function perfectly well without him. Deanna Ahart had come to the gates of Spencer International for a completely different reason. Her mother worked in the office building across the street, and today was special. It was her mother's birthday, and Deanna had saved up enough money to buy a small cupcake from the bakery 2 blocks away. She'd been walking past when the crowd started gathering, when the whispers turned to laughter, when the cameras started flashing. At first, she didn't understand what was happening. Adults surrounded her, their phones held high, their voices excited in that particular way people get when they're witnessing something they should enjoy but do anyway. A woman next to her was filming, providing breathless commentary to her social media followers. "You're not going to believe this. Kerry Spencer, the Kerry Spencer, just got locked out of his own company. This is wild." Deanna stood on her tiptoes, trying to see what everyone was looking at. When she finally caught a glimpse through the crowd, she saw a man in a blue suit standing very still in front of the iron gates. He looked important. The kind of important her mother always told her to be polite to, but something about him made her chest hurt in a way she didn't quite understand. The other people saw a billionaire getting what he deserved. They saw justice or karma or entertainment. They saw someone who'd finally been cut down a size, and it felt good to watch because it reminded them that even the powerful could fall. But Deanna saw something else entirely. She saw wide, worried eyes that reminded her of how her father had looked the day he'd lost his job at the factory. She saw hands that didn't know what to do with themselves, the same way her own hands felt when she got lost at the shopping mall last year. She saw a man whose whole world had just stopped making sense, and she knew exactly what that felt like. Her mother had taught her to pay attention to people's eyes. "That's where the truth lives," she'd always said. When someone's mouth is saying one thing but their eyes are saying another, believe the eyes. And this man's eyes were screaming, even though his mouth was pressed into a tight, Silent line. The woman behind the gates was still talking, her voice sharp and angry. The security guards looked uncomfortable. The crowd was loving every second. But Deanna kept watching the man in the blue suit, and she noticed something that no one else seemed to see. His hands were shaking. Just a little. Just enough. She thought about her cupcake money, folded carefully in her dress pocket. $3 bills and some coins. It had taken her 2 months to save it, doing small chores and being extra good. It was supposed to make her mother smile on her birthday. But right now, standing in this crowd of laughing strangers, Deanna thought her mother might smile even bigger if she knew her daughter had helped someone who looked like their whole world was ending. She made her decision before she could talk herself out of it. Deanna didn't think about the cameras or the crowd or the fact that adults were supposed to handle adult problems. She just moved. Her small body slipped easily between the legs of people in front of her, ducking under the yellow security tape that had been stretched across the driveway to keep onlookers at a distance. "Hey, little girl, you can't," one of the security guards started, but she was already past him, her purple dress a bright spot of color against the gray pavement. Kerry didn't see her coming until she was right there, standing directly in front of him. He looked down, confusion replacing the blank shock that had settled over his features. For a moment, they just stared at each other, the fallen billionaire and the child who barely reached his waist. Deanna's heart was beating fast, the way it did when she had to give a presentation at school. Her hands trembled as she reached into the pocket of her dress, feeling for the carefully folded bills she'd been keeping safe all morning. The paper was soft from being folded and refolded, warm from being close to her body. She pulled out the $3 bills and a handful of coins, 2 quarters, 3 dimes, and 4 pennies. In the sunlight, they didn't look like much. Certainly not compared to the towering building behind the gates, or the expensive cars in the parking lot, or the designer suit the man in front of her was wearing. But it was everything she had. And her mother always said that when you gave from what you had, not from what you had left over, that's when it meant something real. "Mister?" Her voice came out smaller than she'd intended, and she had to clear her throat and try again. "Mister, I heard them say you can't go home, that you don't have a place anymore." Kerry's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He seemed unable to process what was happening, this small interruption to his catastrophe. Deanna stretched her hands out, offering him the money. The bills fluttered slightly in the breeze. "I was saving this for my mom's birthday, but I think you need it more right now. It's not a lot, but maybe I can help you find a new home. My mom says $3 can buy a lot of things if you're smart about it." The crowd had gone silent. Even the woman behind the gates had stopped talking. Everyone was watching this child offer her savings to a man worth billions, and no one could quite believe what they were seeing. "My neighbor, Mr. Patterson, he lost his apartment last year," Deanna continued, her voice growing steadier as she talked. "But people helped him, and now he has a new place. It's smaller, but he says it's better because he knows who his real friends are now. Maybe that could happen for you, too." She pushed her hands forward again, insistent. "Please take it. You look really sad, and nobody should be that sad when people can help." Kerry Spencer had been trained by 2 decades of ruthless business to control his emotions. He'd sat through hostile takeovers without flinching, delivered layoff notices without hesitation, and walked away from begging contractors without a backward glance. He'd built a fortress around himself where sentiment couldn't reach, where weakness couldn't take root, where feelings were just obstacles to clear-eyed decision-making. But standing in front of this child with her 3 crumpled dollars and her honest eyes, every wall he'd ever built began to crack. His throat tightened. His vision blurred. He tried to speak, tried to tell her he didn't need her money, that she should keep it for her mother's birthday, that he was fine. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, something else rose up from a place so deep inside him that he'd forgotten it existed, a sob, raw and uncontrolled, that he barely managed to swallow back down. Behind the gates, Victoria Chen's pointing hand had lowered. The executives clustered around her had fallen silent, their smirks fading into something that looked almost like shame. One of them turned away entirely, unable to watch. The crowd's energy had shifted. The smartphones were still recording, but the gleeful commentary had stopped. People who'd been laughing a moment ago now stood with uncomfortable expressions, suddenly aware that they'd been enjoying a man's destruction. A woman near the back wiped at her eyes. A teenage boy lowered his phone, looking uncertain. Kerry dropped to one knee. It wasn't a conscious decision. His leg simply gave out, bringing him down to Deanna's eye level. Up close, he could see that her purple dress had been mended at the hem, careful stitches that spoke of someone who took care of what they had. Her shoes were scuffed but clean. Her hair was pulled back with a simple elastic band. She was offering him everything she had, and it was so much more than he'd ever given anyone. "Why?" he managed to whisper, his voice cracking on the single word. "Why would you do this for me? You don't even know me." Deanna looked at him with an expression far too wise for her years. "My mom says that's when it matters most. When you help someone you don't know, and you don't get anything back, that's when it's real kindness." She says kindness isn't about what people deserve. It's about what we all need. Something inside Kerry's chest, something that had been frozen solid for 20 years, finally shattered. A sound escaped him that was half laugh, half sob. Tears he'd been holding back spilled over, running down his face in hot tracks that he didn't bother to hide. His hands, which had signed billion-dollar deals without trembling, shook as he reached out and gently closed Deanna's fingers around her money. "Keep it," he said, his voice thick with emotion he could no longer control. "Keep it for your mother. She raised someone extraordinary." Kerry stayed on his knee for a long moment, eye level with Deanna, feeling the weight of 20 years lifting off his shoulders in a way that was both terrifying and liberating. His phone buzzed insistently in his pocket. His lawyer, no doubt, or perhaps one of the board members who remained neutral in Victoria's coup. Someone who wanted to strategize, to plan the counterattack, to begin the legal battle that would drag through courts for months or years. He pulled out the phone, glanced at the screen, and then did something he'd never done in his entire career. He powered it off completely. The screen went dark, and with it, the last thread connecting him to the man he'd been an hour ago. "Deanna," he said, his voice still rough with emotion, "would it be all right if I walked you home?" The little girl's face transformed, worry replaced by pure delight. "Really? You want to—" "I can't think of anywhere else I'd rather be," Kerry said, and the truth of it struck him like a physical force. For the first time in decades, he had nowhere he needed to be, no emergency requiring his immediate attention, no crisis only he could solve. He was completely, utterly free, and the freedom felt like stepping out of prison into sunlight. He stood slowly, his hand finding Deanna's, small one, her fingers wrapped around his with complete trust, and something in his chest, that shattered, melted thing that had once been his hardened heart, swelled painfully. Behind them, someone from the crowd called out, "Mr. Spencer, aren't you going to call your lawyer?" "Fight this." Kerry turned back one final time. The gates of Spencer International rose behind him, ornate and imposing, crowned with gold leaf and the family crest he'd commissioned from a designer who charged $50,000 for the work. Beyond the gate stood the building itself. 43 stories of steel and glass, his name etched in letters 3 feet tall across the marble facade. He believed those towers would outlast him, that concrete and steel were the only things permanent enough to matter, that his legacy would be measured in the skyline he'd altered and the buildings that bore his name. But standing there with Deanna's hand in his, looking at the empire that had just devoured him, he finally understood what his ex-wife had tried to tell him years ago. Buildings were just buildings. They could be bought, sold, seized, demolished. They had no loyalty, no memory, no heart. "No," Kerry said quietly. "I'm done fighting for things that don't love me back." Deanna tugged at his hand, her voice apologetic. "My house isn't very fancy. The paint is peeling, and sometimes the heater doesn't work so good." Kerry looked down at her and smiled, a real smile, unguarded and genuine. "I think it sounds perfect." They walked for 20 minutes through streets Kerry had never noticed, though his company owned properties in this neighborhood. Deanna kept up a steady stream of conversation, pointing out landmarks that mattered to her. The corner store where Mr. Kim sometimes gave her candy when her mother bought groceries. The park where the swings were broken but the slide still worked. The library where she went after school when her mother worked late. Kerry listened, really listened, in a way he couldn't remember doing in years. He noticed things he'd never paid attention to before. The way some houses had gardens lovingly tended to spike cracked sidewalks, the children's chalk drawings on the pavement, the neighbors who called out greetings to Deanna by name. There was a community here, a web of connections and care that existed completely outside his awareness, thriving in the shadow of buildings he'd built without ever considering who lived around them. When they turned onto Deanna Street, Kerry saw the house immediately. It was small, wedged between two others in a row of aging structures that had probably been built in the 50s. The paint was indeed peeling, exposing patches of weatherwood beneath. The front step sat slightly crooked, and one of the porch railings was held together with what looked like wire. The small yard was mostly dirt, though someone had planted flowers and repurposed coffee cans along the walkway. To Kerry's trained eye, the house needed at least $30,000 in immediate repairs. The roof sagged slightly on one side. The windows were old single-pane, energy inefficient, probably letting the heat out in winter and the cool air out in summer. The foundation showed signs of settling. But he also saw the wind chime someone had hung by the door, their soft music welcoming. The carefully swept porch. The small wreath made of paper flowers that had been colored with crayons. The curtains in the front window, mismatched but clean, pulled back to let in light. Someone loved this house. Someone had made a home here with whatever they had. "Mama," Deanna called out, pulling Kerry up the wobbly front step. The door opened, and a woman emerged, wiping her hands on her apron. She had Deanna's eyes and the same careful way of moving, as though she was used to making a little go a long way. Her expression shifted from confusion to alarm when she saw Kerry. "Deanna, who—" "Mama, this is the man I told you about, the one who needed help." Deanna was practically bouncing with excitement. "I tried to give him my birthday money for you, but he said I should keep it, and then he walked me all the way home even though those mean people were being really awful to him, and—" "Breathe, baby," her mother said gently, then looked at Kerry with sharp, assessing eyes. "I'm sorry, I don't understand. What's going on?" Kerry opened his mouth to explain, but found himself looking around at the peeling paint, the struggling flowers, the home held together with determination and love, and all his carefully prepared words disappeared. "I need to learn something," he said finally, "and I think maybe you could teach me. Thank you for watching Brittany Stories. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more powerful stories you won't forget, and please leave a comment below. I will love to hear from you.